Hi everybody, welcome back to the Chasing Psychological Safety video series with myself and Dwayne Blomstrom. It's nice to be back, it's great to be back. Today's video is one that we promised before and in yesterday's article. It's about tips for leaders for being aware of and building emotional intelligence in teams and in remote teams especially. So a couple of things there, Dwayne and I have been a remote team with the rest of the People Not Tech forever since we started the organization. So, and I've worked in remote teams for many, many years now. The experience that we have at the moment and that we're gaining at the moment through working all the time alongside remote teams, because every team we're working with has now become a remote team, is giving us huge insights into how teams are coping, either building or not building emotional intelligence in that remote environment. So we were really keen today to bring some of that knowledge and experience to yourselves, because this topic of emotional intelligence is really critical to setting up teams well for the way that we're working at the moment.
Yes, hi everyone. I'll start with a disclaimer, I suppose. We have been writing about these topics, as some of you may know, for the better part of 2 years, and a lot of what we're saying is not news to us, shouldn't be news to you guys if you've been reading it either. But sometimes the way we frame the dialogue is new to people who are just coming into this conversation, and it may not be quite as pleasant or as expected as they would like it, because there are some amounts of heavy lifting to be done from the point of view of the work that a people manager or a people leader has to do, and that it's uncomfortable in the way we need to frame it so that we outline what work needs to be done. So sometimes when we slightly provocatively make the limitation between a manager and the leader, what we mean is someone who has the people's best interest at heart needs to have a certain amount of emotional intelligence, and that in a way differentiates people who are on a journey from being first-time people managers into true leaders who are inspirational and loved by their teams. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's go back to what does it take to try and build as much emotional intelligence as you can in as fast of a time frame as you can, because realistically we've all lived in work environments where that wasn't first priority. We weren't asked to take care of our people in the same way that taking care of our people will be necessary now in a remote environment, and many of these tips haven't been part of the vocabulary of team leaders. So the number one tip we're going to be discussing today is we would advise everyone to go back to basics. So when we do workshops with team leaders, and when we do a part of our offering for COVID includes a free crash course that's essentially just sitting down with the team leaders and saying, look, irrespective of how you take this, we need to go to 101 pop psychology and explain what does anger look like, what do people react like when they're joyous, what are the basic emotions, how do you recognize them in yourself, and how do you recognize them in your team. So first and foremost, one of the things I say, and Fiona thinks I'm slightly crazy for advising that, is go see Inside Out, in particular with your kids. It's a nice activity in the weekend, but it reminds you of what the actual emotions are and what essentially is at the basis of understanding, both in ourselves and in others, how we react to things.
Yeah, not crazy. I just had never heard of it, and now I have, believe me. So, so once we've gone through that step of just resetting, taking a moment to think about what the basic emotions are, the next thing that we would usually think about is how to create a dialogue with your team, how to be comfortable having conversations with your teams, and that in this new way of working, we talked about it last week or the week before, I think, about making sure that you create a virtual environment for your teams that everybody's comfortable with. We'll come on to that, but the first things first is to create a dialogue, to find a way to have human conversations and human moments with your teams, and to bring, as a good leader will, and it might take time to develop this skill, but just take it step by step, start trying to do it. In those conversations, start thinking about, what am I feeling and what can I perceive that other person is feeling. and create dialogue anywhere you can in order to practice that.
Right. And it's not an easy task. We acknowledge that. So as we were saying in our video last week, that doesn't mean you guys need to see them, but just to make a connection for those of you who have, is we think it's really important that people find their own rhythm, in particular in this incredibly pressurized and tensioned environment in which personal limits are going to become really important. It's very taxing to be on meetings. It's very taxing to be on video. Some people have different abilities in terms of how much interaction of that type they can take. And we do very much believe that people should find what is their personal rhythm and then attempt to communicate that to their team leader. And as a team leader, it's really important that you keep encouraging that. Find ways in which, as a team, you can still accommodate for people's personal rhythms, whether they can take 3 meetings a day or they can take 1 or they can take 5. Find a way that everyone is able to harmonize and protect the weakest of the flock, if you wish. If there are people that can only do 1, then that's your maximum in terms of meetings that you can do as a team. If there are people who can do 10, maybe you can use those people to keep the dialogue open with their other teammates. Find creative ways to be mindful of those personal limits and then incorporate them in your day-to-day routine.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, once you've established that routine with the team and you have been empathetic enough to understand that everybody needs to use the tech that is going to enable remote teams, and that really is the thing that's going to power remote teams, but you've used it empathetically. Be the leader. Lead on being open and honest. It's really interesting that at the moment, we're all working from our personal home environments, and that's starting to break down some barriers to openness and vulnerability. But it's really important, as it always has been thus, for a team leader and for a leader to role model how we want the team to be. So it's your turn to open up first. And that might mean, showing them around your house or showing them around your office space, or, being open about what it's like for you having the kids at home, working at home with you at the moment, but really stripping yourself bare in some way and showing that you are willing to take that first step, because where a leader goes, people will follow.
Yes, and as a continuation to that, this is not even a separate tip, but more of a second part to it. I would say go the extra step in being vulnerable by being extra silly. Think of new things that could potentially bring them in a friend manner. One of the things that we were discussing at the pluses and minuses of, because we've seen it being used in other teams, is you've probably heard of people that are doing quiz and drinking on Zoom. They would be doing a bunch of, in one-on-ones, you could use house party and use those little games of trivia to kind of create that sense of silly fun with your team members. And this is probably something we should have been more clear about. While it's important that you tailor your team meetings correctly, it's also really, really important that you make sure you have a schedule of one-on-ones with your team members. So whether it is 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 or God forbid more than that, people that you are supposed to be in charge of or the leader of, it's really, really crucial that you find a way that you have a mental ticker of the one-on-one conversations you've had with these people, and then become really forensic about creating a connection with each of these conversations. If it's at least make it a goal that you get one of these one-on-ones a day, one call where you get one of the team members alone, whether that's a 10-minute touch about have you found a slot to book Sainsbury's deliveries, or it's hours playing of trivia on house party, or it's 20 minutes talking about both work and sporting events that hopefully are going to happen next year. Find that time to have those one-on-ones and make sure you go through your team, because if you stop to think about it, if you do just one call, on average, you're going to get through your team in about a couple of weeks, which is not exactly horribly frequent of a conversation, in particular if you're attempting to make a tight correlation and a tight connection with your people. And which brings me to the other thing I think I should have probably mentioned is when you do these one-on-ones, don't be afraid, and I'll let Fionn tell you about a good technique, but don't be afraid to take notes and make sure that the things you have been entrusted with in terms of knowledge about your people are things you remember. And it's a tough job at 10 team members that you didn't know before. It's a lot of kids' names and kids' ages to remember. So an interesting technique that Fionn was mentioning was
journaling your leadership. So we often talk to leaders, but not just leaders, anybody, about the power of journaling, the power of writing things down so that you have 5 minutes a day, or however often is feasible for you, to reflect and think about what is happening for you, and in this case, what is happening for your team. So those notes are entirely for you. They're not for you to share anywhere else necessarily. They can be treated completely confidentially, but using that journaling opportunity that you can give yourself as a leader to say, right, I've spoken to X or Y today, and now I know this about them. I know that's really important to them. I know that's a major factor in their life, and I'm going to hold on to that, remember that, and be considerate and emotionally intelligent about that in our future conversations. And Duane was just talking about that pattern of one-to-ones. This rhythm, this will give you a rhythm over time to be creating an emotionally intelligent space and style with your team. And so it's okay to write stuff down, particularly when you're doing it in a journaling style, because it becomes much more functional for you as well, much more useful as a reflection tool, as well as being able to hang on to those really important bits of information about your team that mean you can help them.
And maybe the biggest, brings us to the last part of it really, or the last thing we wanted to tell you about, maybe the biggest obstacle that you have to get over as a team leader, and we hope you do, and we hope you do fast, and you forge these relationships fast enough, and you get to a place where there's harmony and ideally an environment where psychological safety can grow. But the number one thing you have to get over, the one impression you cannot manage, is the attempt to not appear like you're prying. You will be prying. You have to get over yourself as a leader in times like this and take that leap and put yourself out there. Tell your team, look, guys, I'm really sorry, but it seems it's important. We should have done some of this in the past. We haven't. I need to ask you stuff. I need to be really in your face and in a friendly manner, if you wish. I'm going to be curious. I'm going to ask you things that you're going to think are personal, that you're going to think shouldn't be coming from your team leader. I'm trying to not cross any boundaries, and let me know if I am, but I will put myself out there extra much, because this is not an exercise in HR policies. This is an attempt for me to create a bond with you.
Absolutely. And just the final thing on emotional intelligence is to be aware from the moment your teams go into their remote environment about impression management. So there's lots and lots of writing that's been put out there on the internet in the last few weeks about how there's a danger when you go into a remote team, if it's not set up properly, that people will work longer hours, they'll actually put themselves under more pressure. It's actually nowhere near as relaxing as it's supposed to be. Part of your role as the emotionally intelligent team leader is to be super aware of when you think people might be managing your impression of them or managing the team's impression of them by working too hard, not speaking up, all of those things that are really important about building a psychologically safe team.
Right. So what we're saying in a nutshell is we really want every leader of people, whatever you want to call them, to find their leadership path, in the sense of become emotionally intelligent overnight and really connected to their teams. And we think that that's crucial to building psychological safety. We think that this is tough and it's a really hard task. We acknowledge how difficult it is, in particular in this situation. It is undoubtedly the type of work we should have done ages ago and not waited until we are in this limit situation. But with that said, I think it's important that we also celebrate that it's slightly easier for various reasons. As Fionn was saying earlier, we are in a slightly more familiar environment. People might be a little bit more open to give you personal information, because this has become the norm. Barriers have been broken in terms of human moments, but also you have to remember at every corner that we are living an intensely common experience. So it's very likely that if you had to negotiate which one of you gets the office so that you do a conference call, that's probably the situation in someone else's house as well. Or if you just couldn't find, as I said, the delivery slot, your team might not have found one either. So use those moments that are happening to you to relate to your team, and remember that this is a common struggle we're all hopefully going to come out of a lot more psychologically safe. Thank you so much for listening to us, and read from us, and don't forget to email us at contact@peoplenotech.com if you wanted to get on the software and avail yourself of more of these tips for becoming emotionally intelligent fast. Thanks a lot. Have a lovely day. Stay safe and stay sane and stay psychologically safe.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.